US President Donald Trump is back in the headlines, this time calling on NATO and European Union countries to impose tariffs of up to 100% on China and India. The goal? To pressure Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war in Ukraine. But can Europe realistically comply, and what could this mean for global trade? Trump made this dramatic request during a meeting between US and EU officials last week. In a letter posted to his social media platform Truth Social, he outlined a strategy. "Once NATO agrees, we're ready to do major sanctions on Russia," he said, adding that tariffs on China would weaken Beijing's control over Russia. So, why China and India? Both countries continue to buy significant amounts of Russian oil, helping to sustain the Russian economy amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. China is the largest buyer of Russian energy, accounting for about 20% of its total imports, while India imported roughly 35% of its oil from Russia last year. Trump argues that if NATO and the EU hit these countries with tariffs, it would pressure Russia economically, forcing Putin to negotiate peace. China is the largest buyer of Russian energy, accounting for about 20% of its total imports, while India imported roughly 35% of its oil from Russia last year. Trump argues that if NATO and the EU hit these countries with tariffs, it would pressure Russia economically, forcing Putin to negotiate peace. Here's the tricky part. Europe is deeply tied to China through trade. In 2024, the EU imported $860 billion worth of goods from China alone. Suddenly imposing tariffs of 50 to 100% could disrupt supply chains, spike consumer prices, and damage European economies. Imports from India are much smaller, but tariffs on China alone could send shockwaves across industries, from electronics to automotive manufacturing. Even so, some EU leaders have expressed openness to targeted measures against countries seen as enabling the war in Ukraine. But the bloc will likely approach Trump's plan cautiously. Trump's call comes amid rising tensions between NATO and Russia. Just last week, Russian drones entered Polish and Romanian airspace. Warsaw called it deliberate, while Moscow dismissed it. NATO countries, including France and Germany, are reinforcing their eastern flank. Trump has expressed frustration over Putin's refusal to halt the war. He's now considering additional sanctions on Russian banks and energy exports, alongside his call for allied tariffs. However, Trump faces hurdles at home. His authority to impose tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act is being challenged. In May, a U.S. trade court ruled his tariffs exceed presidential authority, and the case is now headed to the Supreme Court, with a decision expected in November. This legal uncertainty could complicate efforts to get NATO and EU allies on board with his plan. Beijing responded quickly, saying it does not participate in wars or plot them, warning that sanctions only make problems worse. Meanwhile, India continues trade talks with the US, with Prime Minister Modi calling the discussions close friends and natural partners, aiming for a successful resolution. So far, both countries are pushing back diplomatically, highlighting the delicate balancing act the US faces in trying to rally allies while keeping trade relationships intact. If NATO or the EU were to impose heavy tariffs, It could strain global supply chains, increase consumer prices, and potentially escalate tensions with China and India. On the other hand, Trump believes such pressure is necessary to weaken Russia's war effort. The coming months will reveal whether European allies follow Trump's call or continue pursuing more measured strategies to support Ukraine while avoiding economic disruption. This is a story with global stakes, from Washington to Brussels, Beijing, and New Delhi. What do you think? Could tariffs on China and India actually help end the war in Ukraine, or would they create bigger problems for the global economy? Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned for updates as this story develops.